Okay, so if you're following the news at all right now, it really feels like the ground is shifting under our feet.
Yeah, it's been intense.
First, we had that unprecedented indictment, really high profile, rocking the very top levels of the federal justice system.
Hmm.
And then almost right after, that calculated violent attack targeting federal law enforcement down in Texas.
It definitely creates this feeling, doesn't it? Like the system's meant to hold everything together.
Hmm.
The rule of law itself are just under extraordinary pressure.
Exactly. It feels like structural chaos, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. These institutions, the ones sworn to uphold justice and security, they're not really seen as impartial referees anymore.
Right.
Instead, they've sort of become the main battlegrounds for America's political divisions.
Which is precisely why we're doing this deep dive. Our mission for you, the listener, is to try and cut through some of that noise.
Yeah. Sift through the headlines.
We're looking closely at the source material defining this, well, pretty unstable moment in 2025. We want to pull out the essential insights, the long-term implications.
Basically, how are these core institutions, law enforcement, the Justice Department, immigration agencies, how are they being fundamentally reshaped, challenged right now?
Okay, so to really get a handle on how serious this challenge is, we probably need to understand where things stood before. What was the historical baseline for trust in these institutions?
Right. Well, for centuries, the whole American system was built on these big ideas: rule of law, separation of powers, checks and balances. The basics.
Sure.
And agencies like the Justice Department, the FBI, historically, they had this perception, sometimes earned, sometimes maybe more aspirational, of being neutral, of operating independently from politics.
That's the key context, isn't it?
Yep.
That idea, that presumption of neutrality, that seems to be what we've lost.
Exactly.
So when did that start to really crumble? When did the erosion of trust turn into more of a landslide?
Well, you can trace the decline, through decades. High-profile failures, scandals. But the thing that really sped it up, the sort of accelerant, is the intense political polarization we see now.
Mm-hmm.
Once political actors start successfully painting these agencies as like inherently biased or corrupted by the other side,
Yeah.
public confidence doesn't just dip, it collapses. The system starts looking less like a judge and more like a weapon for one side.
Okay, let's really unpack that with maybe the biggest institutional shock of the year, the Comey indictment.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here isn't just the political drama, though there's plenty of that. It's the insight it gives us into the structure itself.
The sources we have detail the indictment of former FBI Director Comey. They lay out specific charges, a timeline,
Mhm.
and it's become, well, utterly polarized, as you'd expect.
Right.
But let's maybe move past the basic what happened, which a lot of people know. Why is this structurally such a big deal?
Because it really marks the formal end of a kind of tradition. A tradition of political forbearance, you could say, when it comes to high-level federal justice figures.
Forbearance, meaning?
Historically, there was this sort of unwritten rule. You don't use the justice system to go after the former leadership of federal law enforcement, even when a new administration comes in,
Okay.
unless the evidence is just absolutely undeniable and clearly not political.
Ah, so the indictment itself, just the act of doing it, sends a message that maybe the gloves are permanently off.
Absolutely. Taking action against a former leader of a major federal agency like the FBI, that creates a seismic shockwave.
Right.
It basically shatters the assumption that these directors have some kind of procedural protection from political prosecution by whoever comes next. It transforms the job from, law enforcement leader into a much more politically exposed position.
And what does that do to the machinery of justice going forward? What are the knock-on effects?
Well, the consequences for just governing are huge. First, obviously, the political fallout is explosive. The source material is really clear on this. Fierce accusations flying from both sides about the weaponization of justice. We're just reporting impartially here that the general feeling in Capitol Hill seems to be that the justice system is being used as a political tool.
Regardless of whether you think it's accountability or a vendetta.
Exactly. The effect is the same.
Yeah.
The institutions lose legitimacy in the eyes of half the country.
But there's a deeper consequence too, right? The legal precedent it might set. You mentioned a chilling effect. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we really have to think about what this means for future investigations. If agents and directors now know that every politically sensitive call they make could potentially lead to an indictment years later by a hostile administration, the incentive might shift away from just following the facts wherever they lead and towards, self-preservation.
Playing it safe.
Right. And that creates a chilling effect. Maybe tough, necessary investigations get avoided or watered down. That could fundamentally cripple the agency's ability to do its job.
Wow. The whole idea that justice is blind. That seems almost impossible to maintain in this kind of climate.
It does. And the key legal concept being tested here, really put under the microscope, is the definition of obstruction of justice.
Okay.
The sources highlight that the fight isn't just about whether certain rules were technically broken, it's about intent.
Motive.
Exactly. Was the motivation professional procedure, maybe even a mistake made in good faith? Or was it corrupt political motivation at a high level? That gray area is precisely where this battle is being fought. And the final court ruling, whatever it is, will likely redefine the legal risks for every future high-ranking official.
Okay, so that really defines the crisis facing the judicial side of things. Let's pivot now to the second major shock, the one focused more on enforcement agencies, specifically immigration, with that violent attack on the ICE facility in Texas.
Yeah, that was a really jarring shift, wasn't it? From legal battles and political maneuvering to actual physical violence.
Ugh.
The sources we've seen, like the AP reports, they detail the event, showing just how targeted and severe the assault on that facility and its personnel was.
And again, like with the indictment, the motivation seems key here. It wasn't random, was it?
No, not at all. The shooter's own words, manifestos, messages, they were explicitly linked to extreme anti-ICE sentiment.
Right.
So this event, it's not just a tragedy in isolation. It has to be seen, I think, as a potential consequence of radicalization, fueled by this broader public frustration, maybe anger, over immigration enforcement policies.
So when political rhetoric starts labeling an entire agency like ICE
Yeah.
as, illegitimate, abusive, maybe even an existential threat.
It carries this inherent risk that someone on the fringe will translate that rhetoric into real-world violence.
So if the Comey indictment showed a kind of political attack on the idea of federal justice, the ICE attack showed a physical attack on the practical execution of federal authority.
That's a great way to put it. They're like two sides of the same systemic crack, the same fracture.
No!
And this incident really pushes that core conflict to the forefront, the tension that underlies almost all enforcement actions right now, the push and pull between security needs and civil rights.
How does that tension actually play out, practically speaking?
Well, immediately after the attack, you heard demands for much tighter security, fortress-like protection around federal facilities and for personnel, which is understandable, of course.
Sure.
But enhanced security often comes with a perceived cost to civil liberties, right?
Yeah.
If ICE or other agencies start operating under, say, increased emergency powers or maybe with less transparency because of these security worries, where does the public draw the line?
Yeah, that's the question.
It becomes, what does safety actually demand? And at what point do those demands start to fundamentally infringe on basic civil liberties and rights? That balance feels completely off kilter right now.
Let's try and connect these dots then, because this feels like where the real analysis lies. These crises, the indictment, the attack, they aren't just isolated incidents, are they? They're symptoms of this incredibly polarized political environment.
Absolutely. The source material really shows how political leaders can actively escalate this whole process. Rhetoric isn't just words, it actually shapes reality.
Yeah, how so?
By consistently framing every institutional action, whether it's a new policy, a legal filing, whatever, as fundamentally corrupt or biased, political leaders deepen the divisions that already exist. They basically legitimize narratives of distrust among their own supporters.
And you see the direct result in the actual policies and legal tools being used, right?
Yeah.
Our sources point to this constant barrage of executive orders, major policy shifts, dealing with everything from asylum rules to how ICE agents operate day to day.
It's constant churning, driven, it seems, more by political necessity than by a goal of stable long-term governance.
Yeah.
The legal battlefield is always shifting, and we can't ignore the role of media and social media in all this either.
Definitely not.
The sources confirm what many suspect. News outlets, social platforms, they generate these powerful, often highly simplified narratives that are almost designed to reinforce distrust in institutions.
So if people are constantly hearing stories that the government is inherently biased against them, they eventually stop believing the system can work fairly at all.
That narrative aspect brings us right back to those technical legal battlegrounds.
Maybe we should dig a bit deeper into the specific concepts that are really under siege right now. Let's go back to obstruction of justice. We talked about Comey, but what's the broader standard being tested in 2025?
Well, the courts are really grappling with what constitutes corrupt intent. That's the core issue. Does political motivation automatically equal corrupt intent in the eyes of the law? Especially when you have high-level officials who might genuinely believe they're acting in the national interest, even if others see it as misguided or partisan.
Right.
If the courts start broadening the definition of obstruction to include actions that were maybe traditionally seen as just high-level political maneuvering or policy decisions,
Yeah.
well, that sets a potentially very low bar for future political prosecution.
Okay. Then there's the line between protecting speech and dangerous action, which came up so starkly after the violence in Texas.
Yeah, this is that critical constitutional balancing act, free speech versus incitement. The sources point out that courts are being forced to re-examine the Brandenburg Standard.
Remind us what that is.
Basically, that standard generally protects even really aggressive or offensive speech, unless that speech is specifically directed towards inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and is actually likely to do so.
Yeah.
Imminent being the key word.
And the ICE attack forces a reevaluation of that. Did the rhetoric leading up to it cross that line into a genuine threat under Brandenburg? Or was it still protected political speech, however extreme?
That is precisely the line being fiercely debated in legal circles right now, and it's a tough one. Draw that line too loosely, and you risk chilling legitimate, even angry political dissent. Draw it too broadly, and you risk appearing to condone rhetoric that could encourage future violence against federal targets.
Now, flipping to the other side of this power dynamic, there's the concern over government oversight and the potential for overreach. Are the existing checks on agencies like the FBI or ICE really strong enough to handle the intense political pressures they're under now?
The answer that these current crises seem to suggest is maybe not, or at least they're severely strained.
Right.
When agencies feel they absolutely must act decisively, maybe invoking overwhelming security needs or national stability, there's always a grave risk of government overreach.
Because security is such a powerful justification.
It is. It's almost unimpeachable sometimes. But if the oversight mechanisms like inspector generals, internal watchdogs, if they get weakened or politically neutralized, then the government can potentially justify abuses of power under this banner of necessity. And that just further erodes the rule of law from the inside out.
So we've laid out these huge structural shocks, the legal challenges. What does all this institutional instability actually mean for the everyday American, for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this landscape? What's the view from the ground level?
I think the main effect really is psychological instability. Our sources talk about common feelings, a sort of pervasive fear, widespread confusion about who or what to trust anymore, and this deep sense of disenfranchisement, like your voice doesn't matter.
That makes sense. When the very institutions that are supposed to provide stability law enforcement, the courts, when they seem volatile and politicize themselves, people feel anchorless.
Exactly. And we absolutely have to emphasize this instability doesn't hit everyone the same way.
Right. Talk about that.
Well, for many minority communities, there's often a pre-existing, deep-seated historical distrust of law enforcement and the justice system, based on decades, centuries even, of unequal treatment and biased enforcement. So this current wave of hyper-politicization and the real risk of government overreach we just discussed, it just pours gasoline on that existing fire. Generalized societal distrust means many minority citizens face this double burden. They worry about the institutions failing, and they worry about the institutions being actively biased against them. The basic assumption that these systems operate impartially is, for large parts of the population, functionally dead.
Which really brings us to a crossroads, doesn't it? The future for these institutions, it's not set in stone. This deep dive seems to show us maybe 3 potential paths forward. 3 fundamental choices America is facing right now.
Yeah, you could frame it that way. Scenario A might be the path of institutional recovery, regaining trust.
The optimistic path.
Right, but also the hardest path. It would require a massive commitment to real transparency, meaningful accountability, not just symbolic gestures and actual structural reform. It needs leaders willing to take short-term political hits for long-term institutional health.
Okay, what's scenario B?
Scenario B is basically more of the same, but worse. The path of entrenched division. The one we seem to be on right now, arguably.
Where the institutions just become tools.
Exactly. They completely stop even pretending to be neutral. They become explicit weapons used by one political side against the other, leading to this endless tit-for-tat cycle of investigations, prosecutions, legal challenges that basically paralyzes effective governance.
And scenario C, the worst case.
Scenario C is the terminal erosion of the rule of law itself. This isn't just about political infighting anymore. It means core functions start to fail.
Like what?
It could lead to increased civil unrest, maybe widespread noncompliance with federal laws or authorities, potentially even legal or, in the extreme, armed conflicts between local or state authorities and federal authorities over who has jurisdiction, who enforces what.
That's a grim picture.
It is.
But the takeaway here, the lesson, seems to be that the outcome, which scenario actually plays out, depends, at least partly, on what citizens choose to do next. The source material really emphasizes that.
It does. It suggests citizens need to actively participate, holding leaders accountable, staying deeply informed from diverse, reliable sources, not just echo chambers,
Right.
and engaging through activism, voting, whatever form it takes to demand institutional stability and integrity.
So in 2025, these institutions, the ones meant to safeguard American rights, American justice,
Yeah.
they are truly on trial.
Yeah. Whether they can evolve, adapt, or if they're just destined to become permanent tools of division, that really feels like the defining question for the second half of this decade.
And that leads us directly to our final provocative thought.
Yeah.
Something for you to consider as you process all this information. Think about these foundational shifts we've discussed today.
Do you believe U.S. institutions still operate based on that founding ideal that they protect all citizens equally? Or has the structural significance of these recent crises, the indictment, the attack, permanently altered that reality?